Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe and leave a like. It means everything to us. Please share this video with someone you care about and switch on post notifications so you won't miss any future videos. Thank you for always supporting. Now, relax and let's begin. Gina Hill learned how to smile on command. In public, Richard Hale held her hand like a trophy, kissing her forehead for cameras and saying, "My queen, you know I don't play with you." People clapped at restaurants. Friends teased. "Gina, see, love, oh." She laughed softly, but inside she counted breaths, because the same man who praised her in daylight could turn cold at night. At home, his voice changed. His eyes measured her, and Gina's joy shrank into carefulness, like a candle protected from wind. That evening, Richard posted a picture of them. Blessed with the best. Gina watched the likes roll in. When she set the phone down, he asked casually, "Why didn't you comment under my post?" She blinked. I was about to." Richard smiled without warmth. "Don't embarrass me. People must see unity." Gina nodded quickly. "Yes, Richard." He leaned closer. "Good girl." Then he walked away like nothing happened, leaving Gina standing there, heartbeat loud, wondering when love became a performance she could fail. Richard's control did not start with a slap. It started with rules that sounded like care. "Don't stay out late. It's not safe. Stop talking to Betty too much. She fills your head. Let me manage the money. You're too soft." Gina tried to obey, because disobeying turned the air heavy. Small things began disappearing: her transport money, her spare SIM, her favorite earrings. When she asked, Richard would tilt his head like she was silly. "Are you accusing me?" he'd asked, voice low. Gina would swallow her words and say, "No." So she began writing. A small notebook hidden inside old clothes, where she recorded dates, moods, and strange events. Tuesday, Richard collected my phone to fix. It returned it with new password. Friday, I heard him say my name on a call. Then he ended it fast. It was not revenge, it was sanity. Gina told herself, if I write it down, I'll know I'm not imagining things. And slowly, the notebook became her quiet witness in a house that shouted with silence. Gina noticed Cindy more before she knew her name. It started with late nights and a scent that didn't belong in their room. Sweet, expensive, bold. Richard began dressing like he was auditioning for attention. New wristwatch, new shirts, new cologne. He'd hum while adjusting his collar and tell Gina, "A man must look sharp. Don't start." Gina didn't start. She only watched. Then one afternoon, she saw a message flash on his phone. "Can't wait to see you again." He snatched it away immediately. The first time Gina saw Cindy in real life, it was at a work event Richard insisted she attend. Cindy walked in like she owned the light bright lipstick, loud laughter, eyes that scanned the room and landed on Gina without apology. Richard's shoulders tightened with excitement. "That's Cindy," someone whispered. "She's close to your husband's office." Cindy stretched out her hand to Richard, lingering too long. "Richard, you didn't tell me your wife would come." Gina felt the smile on her face freeze as Cindy's eyes said what her lips did not. At the gathering, music played and people were happy, but Gina couldn't relax. Cindy positioned herself beside Richard like it was natural. When Gina stood near them, Cindy leaned close and said softly, "Madam, your husband is so generous. Some women are lucky, some just marry lucky." Gina's breath caught. Richard laughed loudly at something Cindy said, then looked at Gina like her presence was an inconvenience. Gina tried to speak, tried to reclaim her space, but the words stayed stuck. She smiled again, always smiling. At home, Richard's mask fell the moment the door clicked. "Why were you dull?" he snapped. Gina blinked. "Dull?" He paced like a judge. You embarrassed me. Cindy said you looked like someone begging for love. Gina's lips trembled. I didn't do anything. Richard stepped closer. Your face is the problem. Your mood is the problem. Gina whispered. I'm tired, Richard scoffed. Tired? Then learn to act fine. He walked away, leaving Gina with tears she swallowed so quietly, even the walls couldn't report her. Betty Lane came on a Saturday, carrying small groceries, like an excuse to be present. She hugged Gina and held her longer than normal. You've lost weight, she murmured. Gina laughed lightly. It's stress. Betty's eyes moved around the living room, too tidy, too controlled, like nobody was allowed to truly live there. When Richard greeted Betty, he was charming, smiling wide. Betty, our troublemaker. Betty smiled back, but Gina saw the way her friend's jaw tightened. The moment Richard stepped out to take a call, Betty leaned in. Gina, she said softly, this isn't normal. Gina tried to defend him out of habit. Richard is just under pressure. Betty shook her head slowly. Control always grows teeth. Today it's your phone. Tomorrow it's your freedom. Gina stared at her hands. Betty squeezed them. If you ever need me, don't explain. Just say, Betty, I'm coming. Gina nodded, but her eyes burned. Because deep down, Gina knew Betty was not exaggerating. She was naming what Gina was too afraid to admit. The love in this house was turning into a trap. That night, Gina didn't sleep. Richard snored calmly, as if he hadn't crushed her spirit earlier. Gina lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her own thoughts. She remembered Cindy's voice. She remembered Richard's anger. She remembered how the world praised him while she shrank. So she began collecting proof the way someone gathers water in a drought, screenshots when she could, voice notes when he shouted and forgot the phone was near, dates and times written in her notebook. Small things, but steady. One morning, Cindy called from an unknown number. Gina answered, thinking it might be Betty. Cindy's laughter filled her ear. Madam, I hope you slept well. Richard said you like pretending. Gina's throat tightened. Please, stop calling me. Cindy clicked her tongue. Stop? If I stop, who will wake you? You think you're still the main woman? Gina pressed record with shaking fingers. Cindy continued. Enjoy your ring. I enjoy your husband. When the call ended, Gina stared at the recording, tears falling. Not because she wanted to fight dirty, but because her spirit whispered, you need proof. Richard came home with documents one evening, unusually calm. Gina, come, he said, tapping the dining table like a boss. Let's secure our future. Gina's heart lifted slightly. Maybe this was peace. He slid papers across to her. It's insurance and some property arrangements. You know I'm doing this for us. Gina scanned the pages, eyes catching strange phrases, beneficiary changes, medical history, quick processing clauses. Her finger paused on a section that mentioned pre-existing conditions. She looked up slowly. Why is my asthma mentioned? Richard's smile thinned. Because it's part of your record. Sign. Gina hesitated. I want to read it well. Richard's chest scraped back sharply. So now, you don't trust me? His voice rose just enough to scare her. Gina swallowed. I just want to understand. Richard leaned in, eyes hard. Do you want to embarrass me with lawyers? Sign, Gina. She glanced at his face and saw something colder than anger, impatience. Fear pressed her chest. With a trembling hand, she signed, feeling like she had just handed over a piece of her life without knowing the cost. After the papers, Cindy became bolder. The calls increased. Sometimes it was a text. How does it feel to share? Sometimes it was a picture of a man's wristwatch. Gina recognized Richard's watch resting on Cindy's thigh. Gina started jumping whenever her phone rang. Richard noticed and mocked her. See your paranoia, he said, shaking his head. You want to disgrace yourself. Gina didn't argue. She simply saved everything, every message, every threat, every insult disguised as victory. One afternoon, Cindy sent a voice note. Madam, listen carefully. I'm not doing hide and seek. I want your seat, Richard promised me. So start preparing your heart. Gina's fingers shook as she played it again, recording the screen with another device Betty had lent her. Gina whispered to herself, this is not love, this is war. And what hurt most was Richard's silence. He never defended Gina. He never warned Cindy. His quiet approval was louder than any insult. He told Gina the truth she feared. Richard enjoyed seeing her reduced. Cindy wanted the crown, but Richard was the one placing it. Gina tried to visit her mother one Monday. She planned it carefully early morning. Quick trip, back before Richard returned. But when she opened her purse, her transport money was gone. She checked again, then again, panic rising. Richard walked in, keys in hand, and watched her search. Looking for something? He asked. Gina forced a smile. I kept some money here, Richard shrugged. Maybe you misplaced it. Gina's voice cracked. Richard, I didn't. He leaned closer. So you're calling me a thief? Later, she tried to call her mother, but her phone network suddenly refused calls. Richard said calmly, maybe your line has issues. Gina stared at him, seeing the pattern: blocked money, blocked calls, blocked movements, a cage with no visible bars. That night she whispered, I want to see my family. Richard laughed softly. Your family is here. Stop acting like an orphan. Gina turned her face to the wall and cried quietly. She felt like a guest in her own life, monitored like a suspect, and deep inside, a terrifying thought formed. If he can control my movement, he can control my survival. It happened past midnight. Gina woke up thirsty and heard Richard's voice downstairs. He thought she was asleep. She tiptoed to the top of the stairs, holding her breath. Richard spoke low into his phone, like a man negotiating something valuable. Yes, yes. Once she's gone, the document will be easy. The burial will be fast. No autopsy nonsense. We'll use her asthma history. It's clean. Gina's body froze. Her throat dried like sand. She held the railing so she wouldn't fall. Richard continued, don't worry, I'm handling it. Just be ready. Gina stepped back quietly, heart beating wild. She returned to the bedroom and sat on the bed like a statue. Gone? Burial? No autopsy? The words circled her brain like birds. She stared at the insurance document she had signed, suddenly understanding why her asthma mattered. When Richard returned and slipped into bed, Gina pretended to sleep. His hand brushed her shoulder, casual, almost affectionate. Gina flinched inwardly. In the darkness, she whispered a prayer she didn't know she had. God, please, let me survive what he's planning. Then she turned her face away and started planning in silence. The next day, Gina became an actress in her own marriage. She cooked like normal, smiled like normal, answered Richard softly. How was your night? She asked gently, as if she hadn't heard anything. Richard relaxed, convinced she was still under control. Gina used that calm to test reality. When Richard left, she checked his drawer and found copies of the same documents, insurance forms, beneficiary notes, suspicious photocopies of her ID. Her hands shook as she took pictures quickly. She restored everything exactly as it was. She didn't want a fight. She wanted proof. She called the hospital, where Richard claimed he had once updated her records. The receptionist hesitated, then said, Madam, your file shows recent activity. Gina's stomach dropped. Who updated it? The receptionist replied, We can't share details over the phone. Gina whispered, Okay, and ended the call, sweat on her palms. Her thoughts sharpened. He is preparing something with systems and paperwork, not just emotions. That night, Richard said, You're quiet today. Gina forced a smile. I'm fine. Inside, she wasn't fine. She was awake. 2 days later, Gina tried to leave early, telling Richard she wanted to buy groceries. Richard pretended not to care. Go, he said, eyes on his phone. Gina walked out slowly, feeling the sun on her skin like freedom. She turned the corner and saw a man leaning near the gate, pretending to scroll on his phone but watching her too closely. When she changed direction, he adjusted too. Gina's throat tightened. She quickened her pace. The man followed at a distance. Gina stopped near a kiosk. The man stopped. Her heart pounded. Is he watching me for Richard? Gina forced herself to act normal and returned home, bags in hand, face calm. Richard looked up. You're back quickly, he said. Gina laughed lightly. The shop was closing. Richard nodded, satisfied. But Gina went to the bathroom and shook silently, gripping the sink. Fear had a new shape now, organized, deliberate. She texted Betty with trembling fingers. Betty, I need to see you. It's urgent. Betty replied immediately. Where are you? Are you safe? Gina stared at the message and typed the truth she had been avoiding. I think Richard is planning something to erase me. Betty didn't come loudly. She came like someone entering a dangerous space, calm, careful, no drama. She called Gina and said, I'm nearby. Don't rush. Just breathe. Gina's voice trembled. Betty, he's watching me, Betty replied. Then we moved smart. That night, Betty reached out to her cousin, who knew a reliable officer. I don't need noise, Betty said on the phone. I need someone who understands evidence. Her cousin gave one name, Detective Thomas Okafor. He's quiet but thorough, he said. If there's something real, he'll see it. They arranged a meeting like it was ordinary Gina going to a pharmacy, Betty running errands, then slipping into a small office space behind a shop where Thomas waited. Gina sat, hands clasped tightly. Thomas didn't push her to cry. He simply said, Tell me slowly. Gina began, voice shaky. The control, the documents, Cindy's threats, the call about burial. Thomas listened like a clock, steady, precise. When Gina finished, he said softly, You did well by keeping records. Now we move carefully. This is not gossip. This is survival. Detective Thomas studied Gina's evidence one piece at a time. He played Cindy's voice notes, paused, rewound, and listened again. He checked the photos of documents, zooming into signatures and dates. He asked calm questions. When did he ask you to sign? Who witnessed it? Do you have messages showing pressure? Gina answered, feeling both exposed and relieved. Thomas nodded slowly. You're not paranoid, he said. You're observant. That's why you're alive. Gina's eyes filled with tears because no one had validated her reality in a long time. Thomas leaned back and said the line that became their foundation. We can't move on feelings. We move on proof, Gina whispered. But what if he hurts me before proof is enough? Thomas met her gaze. Then we protect you while we build it. Betty squeezed Gina's hand. Thomas continued. If he thinks you're still under control, he'll relax. That's when people expose themselves. Gina swallowed hard. So I should act normal? Thomas nodded. Normal enough to survive. Smart enough to remember everything. You're not alone anymore, Gina. But you must follow instructions. This is delicate. A week later, Thomas called Betty with a plan that made Betty go quiet. The safest way is to let Richard think his plan succeeded, Thomas said. Betty's voice cracked. You mean? Thomas answered carefully. A staged death record, not real harm, controlled. If he believes she's gone, he'll rush, he'll sign, he'll talk, he'll reveal partners. That's when we arrest him cleanly. Betty's hands shook as she relayed it to Gina. Gina stared at her like she'd been asked to disappear from her own life. You're telling me to die while still breathing. Gina whispered. Gina broke down slowly, not loudly. Tears rolled as she imagined her mother mourning, her neighbors whispering, her name being spoken like past tense. I don't want to do this, she cried. Betty hugged her. I know, Gina sobbed. What if people believe it forever? What if I lose everything? Betty whispered back. What is everything if you lose your life? Gina's chest tightened with grief. Thomas came on the phone and said gently, Gina, we won't erase you. We're buying you time. This is the strongest trap for a man who thinks he's untouchable. Gina wiped her tears and whispered, Okay, but promise me I'll come back. The next days felt like a slow funeral inside Gina's heart. She wrote letters she never thought she'd write. One to her future self. When you read this, you are safe. Don't go back. Don't pity him. Choose you. One to Betty. Thank you for believing me when I couldn't even believe myself. One to her mother, short and trembling. If you hear something terrible, please know I didn't abandon you. I'm fighting to live. She folded the letters and handed them to Betty, who cried quietly as she took them. You will give them only if needed, Gina insisted. Gina also practiced being fine. She cooked Richard's favorite soup, laughed at his jokes, asked about his day. Richard's confidence grew. He began calling her my good wife again, like he was rewarding obedience. Gina smiled and felt sick inside. At night, she sat alone in the bathroom and stared at her reflection. I'm still here, she whispered. I'm still Gina. But it didn't feel real. It felt like she was becoming a shadow on purpose. The hardest part wasn't fear, it was grief. Grieving a life she hadn't finished living, just to survive a man who wanted her erased. The emergency was planned with strict caution. Thomas made sure it looked believable on paper without endangering Gina. A controlled incident, a record trail, a medical note enough to trigger Richard's confidence. Gina was moved quietly to a safe place. Her phone switched off, her digital presence erased temporarily. Betty stayed the only bridge. When the plan activated, Richard received the news in a way designed to pull out his true reaction. Gina's breath shook in the safe house as Thomas updated Betty. It's moving. Stay calm. Richard's response was almost immediate and telling. Instead of confusion and panic, he moved like a man checking off a list. He made calls. He visited places quickly. He told people dramatic stories. It happened so suddenly, he cried loudly in public, but his eyes were calculating. He began arranging burial plans with speed, telling everyone, we must honor her quickly. In the safe house, Gina listened through Betty's small updates and felt her stomach twist. He's acting, she whispered. Thomas replied firmly, let him act. Actors always forget the microphone is on. Gina closed her eyes and prayed that her pain would become evidence. Richard wore black and posted long captions about heartbreak. I have lost my pillar, he wrote. Pray for me. People sympathized, commenting crying emojis. Women called Gina a good wife, even in death. Men praised Richard for holding up. He stood in the center of attention like a man collecting sympathy as currency. At his family house, he cried dramatically. Gina was my everything, he said, voice shaking. George watched him, troubled by something he couldn't name. The tears looked real, but the timing felt rehearsed. Cindy stepped in quickly, gentle acting at first. She came with food, sat beside Richard, held his hand and said, I'm here for you. When people were around, she dabbed her eyes with tissue. When people left, her posture changed straight, proud, possessive. Richard, you have to be strong, she whispered, and her smile flashed too fast. In hiding, Gina heard this from Betty and felt something break. So she's already inside, Gina murmured. Betty replied softly, yes, but remember the plan. Let them expose themselves. Gina stared at the wall and whispered, they are leaving my absence like a celebration. It hurt like fire. Richard pushed for speed. No delays, he insisted. Let's bury and move on. His relatives agreed, eager to avoid gossip. People talk too much, one aunt said. Better quick and clean. George frowned. Quick? He asked. Should we not wait for more family? Richard snapped. Are you the husband? The harshness surprised everyone. Richard quickly softened. Sorry, bro. I'm just in pain. But George noted it pain that sounded like pressure, not grief. Thomas watched quietly from a distance, tracking movements, monitoring calls, documenting patterns. Betty fed him updates like small pieces of bread to lead a trail. Strange things surfaced. Richard requesting Gina's documents, asking for copies of death records, pushing for signatures. Why are you asking for her ID now? George questioned one day. Richard waved it off. For burial logistics. George didn't argue, but his doubt grew. In the safe house, Gina paced slowly, holding her own hands. He's rushing because he's afraid of time, Thomas told her through Betty. Rushing is where criminals make mistakes, Gina whispered. Then let him make them. As days passed, Betty noticed details that didn't fit grief. Richard's calls were too businesslike. He met with a man outside a registry office and exchanged documents. He spoke in coded tones. Make sure it's done today, he said, phone pressed to ear. No complications. Cindy followed him like a shadow, nodding, smiling, eager. Betty wrote everything down, sending voice notes to Thomas. He's not mourning, she whispered. He's completing something, Thomas replied. Good. Keep observing. Don't confront. Gina's emotions became a storm she had to hide even from herself. Some nights, she missed Richard, not the real Richard, but the man she thought he was when she married him. She remembered small moments, his laughter, his promises, his hand on her back. Then she remembered the overheard call about burial, and her heart hardened again. How did love become this? She asked Betty softly. Betty replied, because you loved, and he wanted power. Thomas's message came through. We have enough to proceed to the funeral operation. The cemetery will be the final net. Gina exhaled shakily. So my rebirth will happen beside a grave, she whispered. Cindy treated the funeral like a runway. She bought black lace, dramatic sunglasses, expensive shoes. She practiced her sad face in the mirror, then laughed after. They will see I'm the one now, she told a friend on the phone. Betty overheard and felt sick. Cindy even posted a cryptic story. Life changes. God knows best. People assumed she meant grief. Cindy meant promotion. In hiding, Gina heard this and pressed her fist to her mouth to stop herself from screaming. She didn't want to give them that satisfaction. Gina's safe house was quiet but heavy. Every update from Betty was both comfort and poison. Richard said he'll come with Cindy, Betty reported. Gina's eyes widened. To the burial? Betty nodded. Yes, he wants people to see her beside him. Gina's tears fell silently. Even in my death, he wants to humiliate me. Thomas's voice came through, calm. That decision helps us. It shows intent. It shows disrespect. It shows he's no longer careful. Gina swallowed and whispered, then let him bring her. Let them both stand where truth can see them. Her pain turned into steel slowly, carefully, like fire forging iron. George finally confronted Richard at night, away from the family crowd. Richard, he said, voice firm, you're not grieving. You're organizing. Richard's eyes flashed. What does that mean? George stepped closer.
You're moving like someone closing a deal. You're rushing burial. You're collecting papers. You're bringing Cindy publicly. Is this your wife's funeral or your announcement? Richard's jaw tightened. For a second, the charming mask slipped. Mind your business, he snapped. You've always envied me. George's face hardened. Envied you, he repeated, hurt. I'm trying to protect you from yourself. Richard scoffed. Protect me? From what? A dead woman? The words landed like a slap. George's eyes widened. So that's what Gina is to you now? A dead woman? Richard quickly tried to fix it. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just stressed. But George had heard enough. He walked away slowly, heart heavy. For the first time, he suspected something dangerous. Richard wasn't just careless, he was cruel, and maybe, just maybe, Gina's death was too convenient. Richard made the announcement boldly. I will attend the burial with Cindy, he told people, as if it was normal. The room went quiet. Some women exchanged shocked looks. An elder cleared his throat. Richard, it's too soon. Richard smiled politely. Life continues. Cindy is supporting me. Cindy stood beside him, head bowed, playing humility, but her mouth curved like victory. Words spread quickly. Richard is burying Gina and introducing the new woman at the same time. The community began to whisper. Some pitied Gina. Others judged her. Maybe she didn't treat her husband well. In hiding, Gina heard all of it and felt her chest ache. They're blaming me again, she whispered to Betty. Betty's voice trembled. People blame the quiet one because the loud one controls the story. Thomas sent a message. Let them talk. Talking creates witnesses. The more public he becomes, the stronger the case. Gina wiped her tears. So I should allow my name to be dragged, Thomas replied. For now, yes, because we're not fighting gossip, we're building justice. Gina stared at the ceiling and whispered, Okay, let my silence be bait. Let the truth speak on burial day. The cemetery filled with people dressed in black, faces solemn, prayers floating like smoke. A coffin sat at the center, surrounded by flowers. Gina's name on a banner looked unreal, like a lie written neatly. Cindy arrived beside Richard, head high, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Some people gasped, others murmured. Cindy leaned close to Richard, whispering, They're watching. Let them watch. Richard's face held a practiced sadness, but his shoulders were stiff with pride. He wanted this scene. He wanted Gina's absence to be his freedom. As prayers began, Cindy moved nearer to the grave area, like she belonged there. She murmured loudly enough for nearby ears, At least peace has come now. A woman hissed, Have respect. Cindy smiled faintly. Richard didn't correct her. He adjusted his collar and sighed dramatically, as if burdened by loss. In the distance, officers positioned quietly, blending into the crowd. Detective Thomas stood calm, eyes scanning. Today wasn't about drama, it was about timing. Behind the police van, Gina waited alive, shaking, wrapped simply. Her breath came in small waves. I'm ready, she whispered, though her heart felt like thunder. Sirens cut through the prayer like a blade. Heads turned, people froze mid-amen. Officers stepped in, firm but controlled, forming a respectful barrier. Panic rose in whispers. What happened? Who died again? Richard stepped forward quickly, anger flashing under his fake grief. Officer, what is this? He demanded. This is my wife's funeral. Cindy clutched his arm, pretending fear, but her eyes darted like someone calculating escape routes. The pastor paused, confused, Bible still open. Detective Thomas approached calmly. Richard Hale, he said, voice steady. We need you to remain where you are. Richard scoffed. Remain? For what? Thomas didn't argue. He signaled, and another officer held up sealed documents. We have reason to believe there's an attempted fraud and conspiracy connected to this burial. The crowd erupted in gasps. Richard's face tightened. This is madness, he hissed. Cindy whispered quickly. Richard, what is he talking about? Richard snapped under his breath. Shut up! That crack of panic was the first real emotion he showed all day. Then Gina stepped out. Not floating, not theatrical, just walking slow, steady, real. The cemetery went silent in a way that felt supernatural. A woman screamed and dropped her handbag. Someone whispered, Jesus! Gina's eyes were tired but clear, her scarf simple, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at the coffin and felt a wave of nausea. So this is what my life became to them. A scene. She swallowed hard and kept walking, surrounded by police like protection wrapped around a wound. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. His knees weakened, and for a second he looked like a boy caught stealing. "Gina!" he whispered, voice breaking in disbelief and fear. Cindy stumbled back, shaking her head. "No, no, no," she muttered, as if denial could reverse reality. George, standing among family members, stared like a man seeing daylight after years in a dark room. Gina stopped a few steps from Richard. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I'm alive," she said, "and I didn't come back alone." The police presence answered for her, loud and final. Gina looked at the crowd first, not Richard. Her eyes moved across faces, pity, shock, confusion, shame. She breathed in slowly and spoke softly. "I didn't die, I escaped." The words fell heavy on the grass. Some people began to cry. Others covered their mouths. Gina continued, voice shaking but firm. "I escaped a plan. I escaped threats. I escaped being erased." She turned her gaze to Cindy, who stood frozen. Gina didn't insult her. She simply said, "You wanted to stand at my grave as a winner, but you were standing at a crime scene." Richard tried to speak, voice trembling. "Gina, please!" Gina lifted her hand slightly, stopping him. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to perform now." Richard's eyes filled with tears, but they looked like the same tears he practiced online. Gina's voice softened even more, almost a mourning. "I loved you. I defended you. I endured you. But you planned my end like paperwork." George stepped forward, voice broken. "Gina, what is happening?" Gina looked at him sadly. "Brother George, the truth is happening." And the truth did not need shouting to destroy lies. Detective Thomas stepped forward and read Richard his rights, calm as a judge. The words sounded like a door locking. Conspiracy, threats, attempted fraud, coercive control, evidence tampering. Richard's face twisted between rage and pleading. "This is a setup," he shouted. "My wife is mentally unstable. Ask anyone." Thomas didn't flinch. "We have recordings," he said. "We have documents. We have witnesses." Cindy began crying loudly, grabbing her hair. "I didn't know, I swear!" But her voice sounded like panic, not innocence. Richard turned to Gina, tears streaming. "Gina, please, you know me," he begged. Gina stared at him, heart aching, because a part of her wanted to remember the man she married, but she forced herself to stay present. "I knew the version you sold me," she said quietly. "Not the version that planned burial." Richard tried to reach her, but officers held him back. George covered his mouth, shaking. As Richard was cuffed, he tried one last performance. "I loved her," he cried. Gina whispered, "Love doesn't need a fast burial." And for the first time, his audience did not clap. The investigation unfolded, like a painful story finally told properly. Thomas revealed the evidence. Cindy's threatening calls, the suspicious insurance documents, the beneficiary changes, the recorded conversation about fast burial and no autopsy. Gina's notebook, dates, times, patterns became a timeline of control. Witnesses came forward slowly. A clerk who remembered Richard insisting on urgent processing, a neighbor who saw the strange watcher near Gina's gate, a family member who heard Richard call Gina a dead woman. Every piece felt small alone, but together they formed a clear picture. Family reactions cracked open like old walls. Some cried in shame, others defended Richard out of pride. One aunt yelled, "Gina, why didn't you speak?" Gina's voice trembled as she answered, "Because every time I spoke, I was punished. And when I kept quiet, I was still punished." George sat down heavily, eyes wet. "I doubted," he whispered, "but not enough." Gina reached out slightly. "You tried," she said gently. Cindy's friends vanished. The community that once praised Richard now avoided his eyes. And Gina, for the first time in a long time, felt her truth standing in open air, not locked inside her throat. When the noise settled, Gina faced the quiet question, "What now?" She didn't throw parties. She didn't dance on anyone's downfall. She sat with Betty in a small room, holding a cup of tea that kept getting cold because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I feel empty," Gina admitted. Betty squeezed her fingers. "That emptiness is space," she said. "Space you've never had." Detective Thomas visited briefly, respectful. "We'll proceed legally," he assured. "You're safe. We'll keep you protected." Gina nodded, tears rising, not of weakness, but release. Gina later visited her mother privately, alive in front of the woman who thought she had lost her. Her mother cried until her shoulders shook. "My child," Gina whispered. "I'm here. I'm here." That night, Gina wrote one last letter to herself. "You survived. Don't negotiate with fear again." She filed protection orders, began therapy, and chose boundaries like oxygen. George apologized deeply. Gina accepted his apology without returning to pain. In the final scene, Gina stood at her window, breathing steadily. The world didn't suddenly become perfect, but Gina did something she hadn't done in years. She chose her life, loudly, without permission. We've come to the end of the story. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification. Thank you so much for watching.